Mr. Zeron, hi. What a pleasure.
Uh, How are you, my friend? Thank you for having me on.
I'm great. I'm great. This is an honor. This is a pleasure. This is as big as it gets for me. To the viewers, this is Mr. Christian Zeron. I'm gonna let him introduce himself, but I'm gonna introduce him to me, like who he is to me. He's my biggest inspiration. He's the person that made me start the podcast and everything that I'm doing. He's the person that shaped my taste, literally, and we will talk about that further. And he's the fucking goat. So, Mr. Christian Zeron, it's a pleasure. It's an honor to have you here with me today. Thank you for accepting the invitation and joining the family of Time Tunnel.
Don't don't be silly, man. Thank you so much for following for so long and for being so supportive. I was thinking about this earlier. Because I started this company, the first company, Theo and Harris, in the watch space, about 10 years ago. I was 19, I was 18, 19. And, naturally my voice was of an 18 or 19-year-old. So the people that we attracted were young. It was a totally new kind of generation of watch collector at the time. Now there's a base in that age, grew up because of the kind of the advent of TikTok and the explosion of this space on that medium,
Yes.
And Instagram as well. But it's been crazy what's happened in the last couple of years. But back then, this was not common. This was very unusual for two very young people to be so passionate, informed, and kind of enthralled with this hobby. So, further down the line, I just can't believe that, having conversations with young people that are so passionate, because if I had known that back then, it would have been, really special. She felt very, not to be melodramatic, but it was a very kind of lonely thing at the time, right?
Yes.
This is kind of a hobby that was, on back forums and not really in the public sphere. And I think was misunderstood as very materialistic and sort of weird.
Yes.
And yet now fast forward 10 years and I really can't believe that we're having conversations like this. So thank you for being just another young troubadour in this industry.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor, and I do get it. The loneliness part and the lonely part is true. Being the first person in my country, I actually get it. It's pretty materialistic to me, and I see how people think about these things are like, as like objects that are just worth nothing but crazy amounts of money, and they have no sentimental value or anything.
But it's the exact opposite, right? I mean,
Exactly.
when we say that we love watches, I think if you're a healthy, even semi-intelligent person, what you're really saying is, I love the intersection of history and design and material and technology, and that watches represent, that watches live at the intersection of. That's what you're really saying, right? Watches as a word is just shorthand for that intersection. So it's on a level, sure, there's a materialistic element, right? When I put on a yellow gold date, that's been mass produced, and maybe on a technical level, maybe a boring watch, there is a materialistic value to it that I'm not embarrassed of, that I'm intrigued by. There's a very human, if you're being humble enough to recognize, just like primal instinct to say, this is the symbol of success.
Yeah.
Sure, that is absolutely true. And I can get poetic about that, but that is, I think, an outlier, right? If you're really into watches, you can just for seemingly endless periods of time drone on about, what you find so interesting about a Cartier or about a Piaget. And I think as you talk and in dialogue specifically, you learn more about these things and fall even deeper, more deeply in love with them. So again, this is easy for me, man. And I love this stuff. You know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's great. Okay, now let me get into the questions, because I have a couple of questions. Actually, I gotta tell the viewers that this is not our first time talking. We spoke, about 4 days ago, right? And we had some technical difficulties, and we weren't able to publish that. Which I'm very thankful for. You being such a generous person with your time, to give us another chance, to do this. But
I think that there's an old expression that the measure of a man is not whether or not he spills the wine on the tablecloth, but how the other man reacts and forgives him immediately. I think that's I live by it. Try to live by it.
So you forgave me for spilling the wine on your carpet.
That's so silly. It's not a problem. God, I've done it a million times.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. No wonder why you're my inspiration. No, it's great. It's great. Well, listen, I have a couple of questions, and I want to start off. I want to ease in, to introduce you a little bit more to the viewers and everything. I know that what you studied in college and in your life has nothing to do with horology, right? Your studies were a little bit unrelated. And my question is, how did you go from what you did to being this much of a watchmaker today?
Yeah, you're right. From one perspective, you're definitely geez. I always, I grew up in a very, traditional, New Jersey Italian American family that was very, I didn't really, our culture is defined by the oral tradition. I was talking about this just yesterday with some colleagues of mine, how, storytelling was just so important to us, and how geriatric aunts and uncles, these old people, still managed to kind of control language so well and to capture attention so well. So that was really, as a child, the only thing I was really interested in. It was telling stories that people might find interesting, right? For me, it was a sort of witchcraft, a sort of magic to see my uncles and aunts do it. I couldn't believe it. And I always aspired to do that one day. So that manifested a little bit later in life into being a trial attorney, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a trial attorney, and I wanted to convince juries of things. And I wanted to, basically use my command of the English language for good or bad. I mean, I suppose you don't know when you're that young, but really, as I went to college, or as I was going into college, I stumbled into Seton Hall University. I became a Catholic Studies major because the Catholic Studies degree, or the curriculum, was scoring so high on the American law school admissions test. The only degree that was actually scoring higher was mathematics, and I'm not very good with numbers. So I immediately decided to study religion, to study Catholicism. At the time, I was just a classic millennial, begrudging and kind of nasty atheist, and I was very posh and very trendy and very cool at the time. And it's not even the point of the story, but the point is, I suppose, that I began on this journey to become an attorney, really just to be a storyteller. What I found at college was, for watches, how much I really did love storytelling about a different subject, right? About history and about design and about mechanics and things like this. And it was at Seton Hall that I started the YouTube channel, and I became, better and better on camera. And, God, I still have so much further to go. But, if it weren't for that major at that time, if it weren't for my decisions on where I studied and how I studied, I certainly wouldn't be here. So although Rolexes they're certainly not invented, in 33 Anno Domini, still, the two things are very related in my mind, I suppose. I don't think I would have had the latter had it not been for the former. So I'm very grateful for that educational, rearing.
Well, you said that I was right in from one perspective. Now I get it. Now I get it. It's all correlated to each other. I mean, you just said in one of your episodes that now that you took the decision to go solo, like with the storytelling and everything, that Theo and Harris YouTube channel is based on storytelling, right? And critical analysis and critical thinking, and I can understand that.
For sure. I mean, to humble myself, a little bit or quite a bit, from a very objective, objective point of view. I mean, my channel is, Theo and Harris channel is 9 years old, almost 10 years old, and and we don't have all that many subscribers, 160,000 subscribers. So we have competitors that have come on the scene much later than us and fared very well on the platform and eclipsed us. I mean, tenfold. So we know that. We know that the value that we bring is more of a niche, right? Value and perspective. It's this critical analysis. It's not very clickbaity. It's not fast food, right? Without being too derogatory about our competitors' content, but it's not fast food. It's not mass market. It is I think it's more intelligent. It's more intelligent. I think and it's not just because I'm smarter. I think it's just because I don't have an interest in producing this sort of content, right? But that's also a limiting factor. That's why we get 7 to 20,000 views a video as opposed to 20 to 100,000 views a video, right?
Yeah.
But I find comfort in that I'm proud of the content by and large, and that content and the demonstration on a regular basis, right, 2-3 times a week, of our ability to analyze and understand, right, the kind of complex, I guess, goings on of this industry, of this multi-billion-dollar, luxury industry, has been the greatest business card, greatest advertisement for my marketing firm, which I started a couple of years ago, right, far well into Theo and Harris. And it, ultimately, and who knew at the time, but, being sort of didactic and unpopular on social media really led into the greatest decision, right, of my adult, I'm 28, I'm not very old, but of my adult life, in right, giving me that avenue to start this marketing firm. So this whole journey, this 9-year journey, has been bizarre. I mean, totally unpredictable, absolutely bizarre. It's been filled with plenty of turmoil, but plenty of reward, and I'm very, very grateful for it. That's why, I don't think it's possible for someone like you to ask too much of me, because I truly am completely indebted to you and people like you, who have essentially put me in this position that I am just like so eternally and profoundly grateful for, period.
No, I'm very honored that you say this. I mean, imagine your idol telling you this. It's kind of crazy. Well, speaking of which, my next question is...
I'm sorry, my idol, my mentor is an Irish man, and Irish people are not generally very good with compliments and adoration. So when I tell him these things, he tells me, "Shut up, I'm not that important." And I'm like, "No, you are. You're everything to me. I would do anything for you." I have that romantic, right, Spanish, Italian, right, background. So we just want to tell people how much we love them, And he's like, "Oh, my father never told me he loved me."
We're breaking the generational trauma, you and I,
Exactly.
We're showing love to our mentors. Well, that's great. I mean, the last point that you made, from answering my last question, was exactly what I was going to ask about. We spoke about, your passion and everything for watches and how it started, from college. My next question is, how did you make the decision to take your passion, for watches from just, a lovey-dovey thing to a business and a way to make a living? Because that's very interesting to me. I've been into watches since I was 13, and now I'm making it something that is profitable. I mean, hopefully profitable and everything. How does one make that decision? And knowing that you're way more successful than I am, I can take the advice.
It's a really fantastic question. I don't know if anyone's ever asked me that before. A lot of things happened at once. Right, a lot of things were happening at once. I was, 18 or 19. I had started this business mostly as a bit of a hobby. I didn't really have lofty intentions. I, figured it was a good way to spend some time and like a fun little project to work on, as opposed to, smoking weed and arguing, right? Essentially, that's what college kids were doing, right? In America, just like getting into arguments over politics and smoking weed, right? Yeah. And I love talking about politics now, but at the time, I was like, I got to do something. I want to do something. So that happened, okay. And then that was in like October is when I started to build the company, or whatever you wanted to call it at the time. We launched in February. That following summer, so in June, July, and August, I, again, still on that law school track, I went and did an internship at a very prominent law firm in New York called Boies, Schiller, and Flexner. And at the time, this was a very, very prominent firm. And they've since gone through their struggles on a corporate level. But this was a really prominent firm. I mean, the firm was handling very, very, significant, cases from, I mean, I could talk about them for an hour, but really significant cases on especially on the appellate level. I mean, really big things were going on at this firm. And they were paying people really, really well. And it was very, very attractive. And the point I'm trying to illustrate is I couldn't possibly have been in a better place if I had wanted to become an attorney. Couldn't have been in a better place. Couldn't have been in a better position. And yet, while I was on my commute, while I was at work, while I was on my commute home, I knew that this was wrong. I knew that corporate law was not for me. Even if I loved the law, I knew that the lifestyle that this business built and is conducive to was not compatible with what I wanted out of life. Why did I know that at such a young age? I think it was because I was at that same time, right, not building Theo and Harris, but I was studying, right? I was studying at the the Bible. I mean, it was in school. I mean, it's all we read. I mean, so I was a Catholic studies major. What do you expect? And again, not as a religious person, a total atheist at the time. So I'm reading all of these, not just the Bible, we're reading texts after about all of these fathers of the church, people that went on to build the church. And they were grappling not with religion so much, or with that canon, but they were grappling with, what does it mean? How do we live in these times? And they were grappling with struggles that we still grapple with today, right? Good examples would be, when put in a position, whether to fly or to fight, right? These are things that we still deal with on a daily basis, right? Fight or flight is something that we deal in relationships on a daily basis, right? What does it mean, right? What does it mean what is the 5, 10, 20-year consequence of flight, right? Of running away from your problems? What is the temporary danger or maybe a long-term benefit of the fight, right? These are all these different kind of eternal questions that humans will always ask ourselves. So I was reading these people that were far smarter than I, and I think I was really impacted by how old the texts were. And I said, wow, I mean, the problems that I'm dealing with are ancient. These are not new. And I think that young people tend to think that their problems are very new and unique. And I'm realizing that, okay, maybe I should not give up my life and my happiness and all my free time to the altar of what is essentially, rigid, right, very hour-centric, capitalism. And I love capitalism. I'm a avowed capitalist. But at the time, corporate law eats your life. Corporate law absolutely eats your life. And you have no time to do anything that you actually want to do. You are absolutely serving your masters 24/7. And I knew that, right, because I had this other wisdom that I'd been reading in class, I knew that wasn't going to be the way I wanted to live. I knew that I would live to regret it. I viewed it as me actually flying away from my actual problem, not wanting to fight the good fight now, take the harder road, get into an argument with my mother about what I really wanted to do with my life. And I knew then that I couldn't be a corporate attorney. I went to my mom, we got into a big fight, didn't talk for almost a year. But I had this other thing, this Theo and Harris, that I could instead choose to try my hand at, entrepreneurship, right? So I'm very lucky in that because all these things were happening at the same time, right? I got this great exposure to the ghost of Christmas future, right? Like Dickens, this is bad. This will be bad in 20 years. I had this business that I could, in theory, invest more time into and maybe see through. And I had these teachings going on in school that were essentially pushing me toward the direction of independence and my heart, right? So with these three really weird variables, these stimuli that were happening all at once, that really pushed me on the direction, right, down that path. Once I had made that decision, it was brutal. I mean, I wasn't making any money, right? I was making hundreds of dollars a month and working. I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I was working. And it wasn't for another year until I started making money. Once I started making money, I started doing really well, in all fairness. But it took a long time for it to click. It did not click slowly, or rather, it did not click quickly. There was no overnight success. It really was like 2 years of legitimately no money, not understanding anything. And I was very lucky because I didn't really have bills. My parents had paid for my college, and I was living in their home. But on an emotional struggle level, how do you commit that much time to something and put, and kind of say that I'm going to figure this out and have no evidence that you're correct, right, for 2 years, right? I had no evidence that I was right. And yet, I suppose I was just stubborn enough to continue doing it. Well, it's a very long way of saying a lot of things were happening at once, and I got very lucky. That's essentially what I'm saying.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Some of the things that you said right now are going to help me, cope with some of my shortcomings, especially when making this a business. And I'm sure that a lot of the viewers, because my viewers and the people that are going to be watching this are from my generation. By the way, I'm 21. I'm a fucking baby, I'm still trying to do something with my life.
I think I am too. I'm really hoping I'm
you are.
I'm really hoping. Yeah.
Here, you're 8.
I do my best. I do my best. A lot of reading.
Yeah, and that helps. Okay, let me ask another business question, and then we'll move on to other things.
Please.
Okay. You spoke about, launching companies and having businesses and everything. One of, the companies or the businesses that you own or that you have is the Theo and Harris Vintage Watson, right? And I wanted to ask about that. What is it to be, and how is it, and how do you deal with, and how do you live as a vintage watch dealer? How does a vintage watch dealer, have, source his pieces? How does he, how does his day go? That's pretty much the question. What's the day in the life of a vintage watch dealer?
What's it like? I mean, I really, because I have limited, right? Everyone's got limited time. I'm not able to invest as much time these days into the dealing of vintage watches, candidly. So I haven't really dedicated a lot of time to that in probably about a year. I've been really busy building the marketing firm. That being said, going back a little bit into time and what was that like? I mean, exhilarating. It was just, treasure hunting. I mean, it was like being, like this Indiana Jones, it's kind of like the poetic idea that you're always looking under, right, all over the world for these pieces that you think are interesting and special. And the only reason that you can see it, other people can't, is because you were a student of it, right? I mean, Indiana Jones is a professor, right? He was a professor at university. That's the reason why. So that was kind of like the poetic, right, over-romantic, right, perspective. Of course, that is a little bit flattering and certainly melodramatic. But in principle, it's true. Right, it was just this constant hunt for these holy grails, and they were, relatively speaking, affordable. Right, the value that we brought to the vintage watch world at the time, and still till today, was very humble. These were approachable watches because they were what I loved. They were what I loved and wore. I loved, vintage Omega at $1,000, right? I didn't grow up in a place that, Paul Newmans were even a conversation, whereas some of my peers in the business did. So they were, they always understood that, a truly, crazy expensive watch was only a stone's throw away. I looked at it as impractical and I would never get there, right? I was so focused, and still am, on that affordable end of the spectrum. And I still adore that end of the spectrum.
All right, let's go to what, to what we truly love, which are watches. Let me ask you some things about watches. Let's talk about the watch world, because I have a lot of stuff to discuss with you, as the expert and the person that made me love this stuff. All right. We spoke about you shaping my taste, right? How would you describe your taste in a few words?
Oh, Jesus. Wow. If the Kennedys were born in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, that's it, right? I mean, because that's kind of the idea, right? That your family, your culture is from this place that will always leave an imprint on you and always inform who you are, but that you did aspire to or emulate or whatever, greener grass. That's it, right? I mean, that's it. The culture from which I come from has absolutely no connection to classic Americana and to, right, like well-read people with nothing, zero, right? But in politics, right? I mean, no, absolutely not. So that's what I would say, right? I mean, I carry with me the imprint of where my family comes from, but I aspire to, like, this American, dream of, I suppose, literacy, for lack of a better word.
I can see that. I can actually see that. And, being a longtime fan of the channel and everything, you spoke about your uncles, the gold watches as a
I'm wearing one right now. Yeah. I mean, I find that culture very interesting, and it's very obviously very common in Italians, also common in Greeks, I believe, as well. Outer borough people. I even know a lot of Arab immigrants to America that I see have very similar kind of that cultural norm, that idea of fiscal responsibility, sure, but you do want that show-off piece as soon as you can have it, right? For whatever reason, we have nothing in common with the, right, generationally wealthy Protestant wasp that wears New Balance sneakers and wears a Timex. They're rich, right? We're poor, but it just culturally, we want to shoot off fireworks and burn our money and wear gold watches. It's just, there's something in our DNA that does that. I mean, and it's a tradition that I'm proud of now, because I do it, I pay homage to it in a very cheeky way, but of course it's irresponsible. Of course that's wrong. And of course, but I know where you come from too.
Yeah, I mean that depends. It depends on who you talk to. You know, if you're talking to
Yeah.
a traditional American, it's pretty fucking wrong. But if you're talking to an Arab, you know, that's coming from nothing, is trying to build an empire, and that is trying to, you know, show it and make a statement. I mean, that sounds like a fucking dream. That's the American dream itself.
It, it is. It is. You know, obviously, you running in the circles that I just have because of the watch industry, right? I mean, you obviously it's a disproportionately wealthy, you know, community, and you know, to oversimplify it, you essentially, you know, become wealthy one of two ways: you either inherit wealth or you create wealth, and that's kind of it. And
Yeah.
so removed from both of those things growing up, I had no relationship to wealth, be it inherited or earned. I didn't really know anyone that was. And when I got into the watch industry, I started meeting these people, and I started kind of seeing the cultural differences between them. I'll never forget a stark moment of contrast was I was in someone's home, this really expensive home in the city, and he was talking about another person. The other person had built their fortune. You actually know probably both these people that I'm talking about, but I won't say who they were. And the other person had built their fortune, and the other person that I was speaking to had not. He had inherited his fortune, although he thinks quite quite highly of himself. But he certainly inherited his fortune. And he said about the other, I don't know. I just think he's so cocky. Ugh, it's so trashy how he's that way. And I said to myself, maybe that's because he made his 50 million and you inherited yours.
Right?
maybe there's a reason he's money. God bless. I mean, God bless. Nothing wrong with that. But I remember saying, oh, wow, you know, I understand that the other guy's a little bit cocky, but he's not unbearable. He's totally bearable. I know he's very kind. But you definitely look down upon him because his success is part of his identity and yours isn't. And that's probably because you don't really have any success to make a part of your identity. And he does. So, again, within relative reason, you're going to have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder if you built your thing. You know, like, of course you are. You're going to have a little one. You did a really hard thing that very few people are able to do. God bless them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but cultural differences.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely deserve to show off. You know, you have the bragging rights. You made
little bit.
I mean, come on.
You know, yeah. So anyway, that's just the watch industry is a funny place. I mean, you're essentially a group of, almost completely men that spend thousands, often hundreds of thousands, even often millions of dollars on completely antiquated technology, right? Watches that you absolutely don't need at all. That is interesting, right? That's an interesting space.
Speaking about taste and everything that comes with it, you know, and our taste. Now that I share your taste, I'm a fucking copy of you. Our taste is basically, you know, small feminine watches and small gold feminine watches, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? What do you think about it being the trend now? Do you think it's a trend? Do you think it's a trap nowadays? Do you think, you know, it's gonna go away? Because to me, they're not a fucking trend. They're everything to me. But what do you think?
Yeah. It's very interesting. Again, not a subject that I really talk too much about from this lens, right? So we like these what are now considered feminine watches, even though right when they were manufactured they were masculine, because you know they're a window into the past. They're a window into this era of design and of history and of masculinity that we appreciate, right? They're becoming popular again. Not for their masculinity, but rather for their femininity, right? I mean, certainly I can speak to this in America. I don't know how much you're witnessing this abroad. I know you're based in Spain now, but the changing kind of, I guess, silhouette of what it means to kind of be a man, particularly in metropolitan cities. But here, right, men are far more. I mean, what's a nice way of putting it? I mean, men are far more, you know, sort of fluid and feminine now than ever, right? I mean, Timothée Chalamet is a male icon now, yes. Right? That is clearly indicative of a change in what we reward, right? And then I won't even take a stance on it. I have no opinion. It doesn't matter.
Right.
But when Muhammad Ali wore a Cartier tank, it was because he viewed it as masculine. When Timothée Chalamet wears a Cartier tank, it's because he's emulating more femininity. So it's a funny thing. It's a funny changing window, you know, of what and why. And we're all doing it for sort of different reasons. I don't wear watches. I don't wear a vintage Cartier tank because it's feminine. I wear that watch because it is classically masculine. right? Whereas if I go to dinner in the East Village, I'll be surrounded by, men who are wearing it for a totally different reason, and they have painted fingernails. And again, I'm not making a value or character judgment at all, but to ignore the fact that these two, that the same end has been reached in two very different ways would be to be ignorant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we are absolutely getting to the same destination in respect to watches via two very different routes.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. When you made the point about Timothy Chalamet, it really clicked. It made sense to me because, I think 10 or 15 years ago, Brad Pitt and guys like George Clooney were, the sex symbols, and now it's Timothy Chalamet. The skinny, short guy with long hair. That's the wave.
And think about it. I mean, even zoom out, even go back even further, right? Before Brad Pitt, before George Clooney, who were great examples, but it got even more masculine, right? You had the era of Schwarzenegger and Stallone.
Yes.
I mean, so we've gotten essentially, it went from almost hyper masculine to sort of refined. And then all the way down to, basically feminine. Basically, you're right. So it's really interesting. Again, without making any sort of judgment, it is certainly interesting to see how it's changed.
Yeah, it did.